Good evening and welcome. I appreciate all of you coming out on this evening. Had a little ice, a little snow. It's been great to have you here for our last program of the fall. Can y'all hear me? Nikki? Okay. We got a terrific program here tonight. Once the midterm election's over, it really starts all the speculation for 2020. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about Mississippi politics. We're going to talk a little bit about Southern politics. And we're going to talk a little bit about national politics. And we're going to try to have a conversation with the audience as well as with Curtis and our distinguished families. You all know Curtis Wilkie. He's the inaugural senior fellow of the Overby Center. And he kind of defines politics. He's been writing about it most of his life. And he's going to kick us off, and then we're going to have a robust discussion. Curtis.
Okay, Charles, thanks. I should say that I was on a panel for a program in Jackson this summer with our two guests, and I was struck by how informative both Austin Barbour and Brandon Jones were about politics. But even more importantly, I was struck by how civil and friendly the discussion was. This is at a time when it seems like Republicans and Democrats are prepared to tear each other's hair out. So I just said to myself, well, we got to get these guys to the Overby Center this year, and bless their hearts, they braved the bad weather and came to be with us tonight. So let me just introduce them briefly and we'll get going. Brandon Jones he's to my far right. He's a Democrat, and he's an attorney with the Barbour Jones law firm that has offices in Jackson and Bay St. Louis. Significantly, his partner is David Barbour, who was a Democratic candidate who ran against incumbent Senator Roger Wicker unsuccessfully last week. Brandon is a former member of the Mississippi House of Representatives, and he's co-founder of the Mississippi Democratic Trust, which is a political action committee here in Mississippi. Brandon's been involved in several other Democratic campaigns in the state. He's a graduate of Mississippi College, Wake Forest, and Mercer University, and he lives in Madison with his wife and their 3 children. Then, simply to my right, is Austin Barbour. He comes from a distinguished political family in Yazoo City. His dad, Jeppy, who incidentally was a classmate of mine here at Ole Miss 60 years ago, was one of the earliest Republican mayors in Mississippi, and his uncle is, of course, the former governor, Haley Barbour. Austin's been obviously involved in political campaigns just about all his life. He played, I know, a major role in Senator Thad Cochran's survival in that very brutal Republican primary 4 years ago. Austin is managing partner of the Clearwater Group. It's a regional public affairs firm in Jackson, and he's partner in a national advertising firm in Annapolis, Maryland, Strategic Partners and Media. Austin, as you may have heard, he was warming up to Mike with a hottie toddy. He is an Ole Miss grad. He lives in Jackson with his wife and their 2 children. So, gentlemen, great to have you here. I'll start off with a couple of Mississippi political questions, and we'll kind of go from there. But obviously, our attention now that the midterms are over is turned to the runoff between Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith and the Democratic challenger Mike Espy. These 2 candidates each received roughly 41% of the vote last week. But since most of the remainder went to another Republican candidate, everyone is anointing Hyde-Smith as the favorite. Brendan, I'll ask you, how much potential is there for Espy to build on the vote he got in so many of the counties in the Delta and along the river, and he carried Lafayette County. And I noticed he carried some counties around Starkville. Sure, he probably carried out Tillamook County. So what can he do to maximize a vote?
It would be a disservice to you all to say that it's going to be easy. He's got a tough road ahead. If you had told me just blindly that we were going to have 870,000 people participate in the Mississippi midterm, I would have assumed that in the second year of the Trump administration, that meant that Democrats were going to do really well. And in fact, they did. We improved over our last midterm by 53%. Tremendous margin. And so about 120,000 more Democrats came out to vote this time than did last time we had midterm elections. Problem though, Republicans improved by 30-some-odd%. And so their 30-some-odd% was better than our 50-some-odd% by about 17,000 people. And so even in a year where Democrats across this country participated in a midterm in the largest numbers other than Watergate, we still found ourselves losing by a similar margin, which gives you a really good baseline for how tough this job is. Now, Mike staked out a different path than David Berria did. Mike has decided to run his campaign with the notion that we can be a little bit better. We talk a little bit more civilly with one another, and he's going to try that. That's another tough uphill climb for this race. And so to answer your question, it's going to be very difficult to build that foundation. I think perhaps trying to figure out how to capitalize on gaffes like the one we heard this week from Senator Hyde-Smith may be part of the recipe, but I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But it's going to be an uphill battle.
That just naturally leads me to my question. Austin, how damaging was the comment about being glad to attend the public hanging by Cindy Hyde-Smith?
I'm so distracted by his socks. I can't. Is this Jerry Garcia or Bjorn Borg on your sock?
We probably do need to get this out of the way. How many of y'all are fans of the Royal Tenenbaums?
Oh, or that guy.
So this is Bomber from the Royal Tenenbaums, a Wes Anderson movie.
I
So
think you're trying to dodge.
No.
that's about as good. That's a better answer than she
You
gave.
have the socks on, not me. So, first, let me say thank you for having us here. It's a great honor to be back on campus at Ole Miss. I always say, outside of my marriage, this was the greatest 5 years, and I was smart enough to stay 5 years at Ole Miss that I ever had. So thank you guys for having us here. Your question was about the comment that Senator Hyde-Smith made this weekend, and there's no question that it is turned into a motivating factor for the Democrats. It's given their side an opportunity to find a wedge issue against her, and it's turned into a turnout vehicle for the Democrat side.
Let me ask you one other thing about another announcement within the last few days. It was interesting to me. Bill Waller Jr., the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, is going to resign his office, and he did not dismiss the idea that he might become a candidate for something. Is Bill Waller going to become the Republican alternative to Tate Reeves? What's going on in your party?
I don't imagine. Listen, it's a free country, and if he's a distinguished individual, done a lot in his life, and if he wants to run for governor, then that's obviously he has the opportunity to do that. But he would be a severe underdog to Tate Reeves in that race. Tate Reeves will have $7 million in the bank. Tate Reeves has got statewide name ID significantly higher than Judge Waller would. And look, Judge Waller doesn't have this history of being a Republican or a Democrat. I can make the argument that maybe he was running against Jim Hood. So we'll see. But I don't know. And it is you know this, it is completely different for a judge who's used to running a judicial campaign where as the candidate, you can't ask people for money. You try not to be partisan. You try not to take issues about policy. You try to talk about law and order and the Constitution and these types of things. It is a very difficult transition to go as a candidate, a judicial candidate, to a political candidate, particularly for a position like governor.
If I remember last summer at our program, you declared very definitively that Tate Reeves is going to be governor next year.
I believe that, and this guy beside me will argue with me. But there's no question he will be the Republican nominee, and I do think he will ultimately be the next governor of Mississippi.
Now, obviously, I'm not privy to much of what goes on in Republican circles, but I do hear that Tate Reeves is not the most popular legislator, that there are a lot of Republicans who don't like the way he has handled himself as lieutenant governor and therefore in charge of the Senate.
I'd love to respond if I have a second. We have an hour, right? Listen, legislators, he's a former legislator. They all have their vision, and there's nothing wrong with this, of how things should be if you're a member of the state house or the state senate. And you ultimately have your priorities that you want to pass, but somebody's got to be in charge. And that person who's in charge has been elected by a statewide, by individual statewide, and he feels like, listen, I have the mandate. This is what we need to do. I'm not telling you no, but let's make sure we stick to these conservative governing principles. And a lot of times that upsets legislators. But the electorate who says, I put you there, is happy. And that's what ultimately matters. And inside the Jackson Capitol conversations, certainly there's some of that. But I think ultimately, it's the state, it's the people who are around the state, their feelings way more important than what people inside the Capitol think.
So
you tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, you're missing the essence of what Curtis is asking, which is, in 2000, while some of us were just crying our way through the fact that a guy like George W. Bush could ascend to the presidency, there was a guy named Karl Rove who taught us that the test really was, who would you want to have a beer with? And that was a genius test, because no matter what you thought about George W. Bush's potential for policy making or running a country or looking after your kids if you went away for a long weekend, there was no question that he was a better beer partner than Al Gore or then later John Kerry. The question that you're asking really comes down to that. Nobody outside of maybe 2.5 people in Jackson want to have a beer with Tate Reeves, and that's because of his prickly personality. Whenever there are people from Lafayette County, y'all elect your supervisors. They get all geared up to head down to Jackson and make their pitch to the state government about what's important to them, the roads and bridges in their county and the various issues they're working on. Tate may give you 2 seconds, he may give you 5 minutes, he may give you the full-blown kiss-off, and I think that's what you're addressing. And so there's no question but that in this upcoming election, Jim Hood wins the beer contest. Who do you want to have a beer with? And he's a more personable person, and he probably likes you more than Tate does.
But the problem with the Rove analogy that you give is in 2000, America was tired of the Clinton agenda. America was tired of the Clinton scandals, one after another. And they were ready to do something different. So yes, George W. Bush was much more popular personally than Albert Gore, the inventor of the internet. I mean, there was no way that you would. Just ask him. He did. He really did invent the internet. Yeah, it's a good invention. I don't know if he got a patent on it though. And so you just can't have that same analogy to 2000 with Bush versus Gore, and then what we're going to face next year, because I feel this way. Voters will ultimately determine this, that there's a majority in Mississippi that believe that governing as a conservative is the better way for the state than governing as a liberal. And I really think that's where, I love that we already talked about 19, that's where the 19 race will end up, is I have my choice of this guy versus this guy, and the popularity contest thing will go by the wayside.
Well, I wanted to broaden the discussion just a little bit. And first, let's take a look at the South. And you look at the midterm elections here, and I'd like to ask each of you, as it relates to your party, what do you take out of the midterms that you would see happening in the South? Trump carried every state in the South but Virginia. What are the pluses that each of you see for your party coming out of the midterms as it relates to just the South? And Austin, we start with you.
Sure. I would say if you look at Donald Trump, he is immensely popular in rural states. There's no question about that. Now, when you get inside rural states and you look at urban areas, it's not as popular. If we go look at Georgia, Atlanta is becoming more and more liberal. It's becoming more and more of sort of a blue island inside the state of Georgia. But I still look at Donald Trump and say, whether you like him or you dislike him, he is immensely popular in rural states in the South and throughout the country. And then if you look at a state like Florida, which is really kind of sort of like four countries within itself, or four states, you've got the Panhandle, you've got North Florida, you've got the I-4 corridor, which is sort of Orlando and Tampa, and then you've got South Florida. I mean, those are all completely different places. But if you look at Florida as a whole, the guy he got one there. Nobody thought he would win in 16, and now the two candidates that he endorsed, I think they're both going to win, even though it's going to a recount and it's going to be really close. So you got to give him credit for being able to win tough victories in one of the most difficult states in the country, in Florida.
Brandon?
There's no question that Austin's right. President
Let's
Trump.
stop right there. Let's just end it.
Just clip that out. There's no question that President Trump put himself on the ballot in a way that's very unique for presidents. I mean, the long history of presidential midterms is that you're not going to have an easy road, particularly when your party happens to be in charge of the House and the Senate. And so for him to inject himself into each of these states in the way that he did was very peculiar and interesting. And it proved for us Democrats that those of us who were looking for a grand repudiation of this president on the scale that I would have liked to have seen even in a state in the Deep South like Mississippi, we're not going to have that. And that's one of the reasons why I think those of us who are hoping that comments by Cindy Hyde-Smith are going to change this election, we're not going to have that either, in all likelihood. If it happens, it'll take more than that. And so that was a sobering reality that some of what we saw in 2016 is not a corrective measure, because rather than speaking something into existence, Donald Trump was running in the United States as it existed. And his nationalist policies still hold sway in places like where we are and in other places across the country. But what Democrats did, and this new reality of Democrats that won, this is a new generation, and the ones that won, of the 38 seats that we're going to take in the House, at least 21 of them are female. And so we're going to have an overwhelming majority of women coming in. This is the first time in the history of the United States that over 100 women have been elected to Congress, which is not insignificant. And so you're going to see that impact the Democratic Party in unique ways, because the overwhelming number of those women who were elected happen to be Democrats. And so what they ran on in these suburban districts that we keep talking about were health care and pocketbook issues. And what we saw in those places is that the Democratic policies and the way of trying to improve the Affordable Care Act rather than completely taking it away, this notion of trying to figure out how we create a bigger middle class, how we make the middle class more attainable for working families, still holds sway with a good number of voters. We came out of the midterms +7 in the popular vote, which is the largest advantage that any party has had in the modern era. And if you had extrapolated that out to the electoral map, we would win the White House. There's a lot of reasons to be hopeful along those lines. But this business of saying that we're going to completely slap this president down or overwhelm him with our heart is just not the case. He is still speaking to a large group of Americans who still vote with him when he puts himself on the ballot.
So, Brandon, do you think that it is better for the next Democratic nominee to run as an outright progressive, I don't like that word, but liberal, or have someone that tries to be more moderate for achieving success as a Democrat in the 2020 presidential election?
Now, obviously, I'm partisan, and so I don't answer this from really a tactical standpoint as much as I do just what I feel in my heart. We are doing politics so outside of the normative values of what I grew up with. When I grew up, Republicans were strong national defense. Now we have a president who kowtows to Vladimir Putin. When I grew up, we were the type of place that said, you know, Reagan, we support our police officers, those folks who are in law enforcement. Now we have a president who is probably tweeting as I speak about the two largest law enforcement entities in this country, the CIA and FBI. World War I and World War II are defining incidents for America. I don't care where, and defining moments for the entire planet. The notion that on Armistice Day, our president stayed in his room watching Fox News because it was raining and chose to tweet because he might have had his feelings hurt over the midterm. We are so far outside of the normative values that have shaped this country, Republican or Democrat, that what matters to me is that we beat this guy. And I think progressive values should be something that we embody for obvious reasons, such as health care and employment. But whether we do that or not, I think that we're going to have somebody who's not afraid to take the fight to him.
Well, with such a repudiation of Trump, can you name a single southern state that is likely to change and vote Democratic rather than for Trump?
The sad reality, I mean, especially if Florida is lost during this cycle, which it looks likely to be, is that victory that I'm talking about will probably take place without the Deep South. But for of course, the counterpoint to that, Charles, is that Republicans are in a fix because we just made tremendous gains in the Midwest and in the Southwest, so the adverse is true as well. What do Republicans do if not for the Deep South?
So how do you feel about all that?
Yeah. So here's what the honest answer is. Messing with you.
That doesn't sound very civil.
Well, it's pretty civil.
It's fair.
Is that there's no choice but to run as a sort of a far left liberal. That's where the National Democrat Party has moved. And, you know, Brandon says his vision of where he thinks the Republican Party is right now under the president versus what he remembers growing up as a boy and remembering Reagan and so forth. But you will not win as a Democrat. You will not become the nominee unless you believe in things like open borders, unless you believe in the mantra of we've got to abolish ICE. I mean, to me, these are very radical positions. I think to the majority of Americans, these are radical positions. I mean, to abolish ICE, this is the chief law enforcement agency that stops human trafficking. For goodness sakes, where have we gone in the country? You may not agree with everything they do, and maybe there's some things that you feel like they need to do to get some more oversight, but that is where the National Democrat Party is, and you can't be sort of a moderate, Bill Clinton type candidate and even think you've got a chance to win, which is going to be a very large, congested primary in 2020 as a Democrat.
Is that okay? Yeah, look, that's nonsense.
No, it's not.
Connor Lamb is a.
But then you tell me who the nominee is that can win as a moderate.
Well, I can tell you who
is.
won on Tuesday. Who won as a moderate? Connor Lamb, Sinema in Arizona. These are people.
Sinema was a former Green Party candidate. She is not.
Her voting
moderate.
record is extremely moderate. Yeah. Sorry, this is in Arizona.
This is as ugly as we get at each other.
No, but it's important to say Ronald Reagan wouldn't win the Republican Party primary now. So the notion that somehow the Trumpization of the Republican Party brought it to some type of moderate balancing point is just not the case. Y'all are talking about building a wall around Mexico as your major foreign policy position. That's nonsense. I mean, that's Mars. That's Jupiter. That's so far removed from things that are going to change the lives of people in Lafayette County or elsewhere that it's not radical to talk the way we talk. It's radical for a party that has true values, like John McCain, like the candidates who you've worked for, like
sure.
I'll even give you Jeb Bush. Heck, Marco Rubio until 72 hours ago had some principles. The way that this group of Republicans have completely Giving up the farm to a person who is an admitted nationalist shows a lack of respect for the history of this country, and it shows a radicalization of the party. And so to say that some congresswoman from Brooklyn said that they want to abolish ICE and now that's democratic orthodoxy and we're all off on the farm is just not
So
the case.
Bernie Sanders, who is as popular a figure in the Democrat Party, and
Lost our primary.
lost your primary, but was the only person that ended up having a chance, came close to Hillary, and I think he had one of the best television ads of the cycle, by the way.
Simon and Garfunkel.
Simon and Garfunkel, yes. He was moved by the far left on this specific issue of abolishing ICE. So please don't give me the new freshman congresswoman from Brooklyn is the only person talking about this. That's
Yeah, but he
false.
lost our
That's
not-
false.
yeah.
I know Bernie ended up losing, but he is maybe one of the most popular figures in the Democrat Party, and he was moved from I don't think we should go abolish ICE to I read this story the other day, a year or so later, okay, I think we do need to. Because that is where a certain vocal segment, I'm not saying it's the majority, that's where a certain vocal segment of the party wants their candidates to be. Are we boring y'all on this issue? I'm sorry, it's
Austin, let
Brandon's
me
fault.
kind
Yeah,
of move
yeah.
it forward. I'm going to ask you both the same question about the 2020 Democratic nominee. Of the top tier candidates that are talked about now, start with Austin. Who would you most, from a Republican perspective, who would you most like to see get the Democratic nomination?
Oh, that's tough. I don't know. For some reason, Joe Biden makes me really nervous to want to run against him because he seems to be a very popular figure. I think he'd do very well in sort of the Rust Belt. But I will tell you, I think Beto O'Rourke's going to be the nominee of the Democrat Party in 2020. Look, somebody's here even for him. He's already has, his Lafayette County chairperson here. Beto O'Rourke is where I think the Democrat Party has moved to the left. He is obviously has a lot of energy. He's a dynamic individual, and the guy can raise a ton of money, and that's where national politics sadly has gone. So I'm just going to predict, and I have, a lot lately, if anybody who'd ask, that I think O'Rourke will be the nominee. I think it'll be Trump versus O'Rourke.
But now that's your political insight, but you can't be wishing that the Democrats are going to nominate O'Rourke.
But see, I do go back to this, that I think his positions on policy are too far to the left for him to be able to win a national race.
Brandon?
I don't have a favorite. I mean, I truly believe that with the folks who were elected last Tuesday, you have an entirely new generation of Democratic possibilities. And I think we'll look at, Democrats won 7 gubernatorial races that were previously held by Republicans. I think we'll look there some. That's been a good ground in the past. So it's hard for me to commit to anybody at this early stage. I mean, like I said, I want a winner. And look, the old saw, if you don't know it yet, and sitting in the Overby Center, you probably do, Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall in love. It's a true statement. It's one of the reasons that we clap when we hear Beto's name, and I get that. And he's also handsome. I mean, there's a lot going for him. He's a former skateboarder. He's got a rock band. I mean, there's a lot there. But I hope that we keep our powder dry for a little while because, again, the mistake is that we take President Trump lightly. And that's a mistake because for all of the ways that we pan him and for all the ways that I'm disappointed in him and don't like his policies and don't like the way he's led this country, the truth is he's got some of this stuff down. So it would be a tactical error for us to kind of marry anybody at this point. We still got to get the field of play.
Mm-hmm. I want to turn to the audience, and we can come back to Curtis and asking questions. Let's hear from you in the audience. I know you came with some questions. Yes, ma'am. The question, I've been asked for the TV audience to repeat the question. Do you honestly believe that we need 5,000 U.S. troops on the border? Is that to both of them?
Yeah, so listen, what I'm way more focused on, and if I was an elected official, is infrastructure, education, healthcare, and the economy. That's what I'd focus on. But that's sort of thinking about Mississippi. At a national level, I think that we've got to do something. There's no question on immigration. We've got to have immigration, a fix to immigration, to figure out a way to bring people into our country who want to be here. But a central theme of that has to be that we also got to have a secure border so that those that want to be here, that we allow them to get here. But I'm way more focused on, as a Mississippian, what do we do to make our state better? How do we get more and better jobs here? How do we reverse the brain drain so these kids don't leave? They don't go to Dallas. They don't go to Atlanta. They don't go to Chicago because we don't have enough good jobs in Mississippi. That's what I'm mostly focused on.
Brandon?
The answer is, of course not. Nobody believes that. Didn't you hear about this caravan that we were all panicked about? All of our good friends that watch Fox News for 9 hours a day were telling us about all the different problems we were going to have, and then magically on Tuesday night we didn't hear about it anymore.
The invasion was slowed.
Nobody believed that. That was a ploy. As was the Game of Thrones tweet he put out about sanctions. As was the thing he said about he was going to lower lower class taxes by election day. I mean, the amount of misinformation we have to sort through in this reality is like a George Orwell novel. But the answer is no, nobody believed that. And the truth is, the United States of America, of all places in this country, has some moral relevancy whenever we don't pick winners and losers in terms of who is able to come into this country. That's been our MO for forever. And so the notion that we're going to climb up into the treehouse and pull up the ladder behind us, I think is misguided. I think the way we've allowed the debate to get pushed in that direction is a failure by Democrats to not show a little bit more spirit. We've had moments when we could do common sense things. Obviously, we want to be safe, but that's never been different. We all live here. We all care that it's safe. But this way that we've demonized the other, the way that we talk about places in South America as if there's some unwashed, terrorist-ridden area, that should be unacceptable in American civil discourse. The second that somebody starts talking that way, we should say, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. The bridges of this country have been built by those people. The major employers in this country were built by those people. And so the notion that we don't see ourselves as part of kind of a collective is one of the problems we've got to erode, and we don't begin that process until we get this guy out of the White House.
Other questions? Not be bashful. Yes, in the back.
Well,
Will you repeat the question?
sure. What's your name? Oh, you got a good name there. So Austin in the back asked a question of why did Cindy Hyde-Smith defend her remark versus apologizing. Look, I am not going to try to speak for her. I want to be very clear. I'm not involved with her campaign, so I haven't had conversations with friends that I have that are seriously involved with her campaign. And I don't know the honest answer to that. Certainly, I think it's clear, because I do know Cindy a little bit from her days when she was in the state Senate, that I don't think she meant anything racist by that. The lady that I know, I don't think is a racist whatsoever. I think it was sort of this odd saying that I'd never heard before, that what I understand is sort of a cattle farmer to cattle farmer kind of thing. And obviously, we all make mistakes with things that we say, particularly people that are on TV or on the radio or politicians. And I'm sure she 100% regrets saying it. But in terms of apologizing versus not, I don't have a clear answer to that, if that makes sense. But good question, Austin.
Brendan, do you have a Democratic outlook on that remark from her?
No, I mean, I have a human one. I think there are a lot of Republicans who don't talk that way. And I think that there's a decent chance, Charles, that there was a little bit of intentionality there. I mean, if we're being honest about the state we live in, and I don't want to sound too morose, but the truth of the matter is, racial politics still holds sway in the state of Mississippi. And if you don't believe that, go volunteer for a campaign. There are still a lot of folks who, let's talk about this race in particular. One of the primary issues that Cindy Hyde-Smith had not only heading into the runoff, but just in this race in general, was how do you consolidate the Chris McDaniel base around her campaign and win a majority so that she can win? Well, I don't think any of you who are familiar with Senator McDaniel or his campaign are not familiar with the fact that this was a campaign whose yard signs had the state flag on it, prominently placed, but not the state flag, the flag of the Confederacy, and who talked a lot about basically old style kind of race baiting politics. And so there's a case to be made, Austin, if you want to know the truth, that the comment itself could have been a dog whistle to voters in Mississippi who are still motivated along those lines. Giving her credit, she and I used to do At Issue together, the show Austin and I do now. When she was a Democrat, she was from the Senate side, I was from the House side, we did this together. I have no reason to believe that she's a malicious person. What's more damning to me in terms of getting to know a little bit about what makes her tick is that 48 hours later, when she does a press conference and she's asked about this 6 times she refers back to a statement. Now, at that point, when your mom got on to you, or dad, or uncle, or good friend that was hanging out and asked you, Austin, why'd you do that thing? You didn't get to refer back to your prior situation 6 or 7 times, but when you do that, it probably meant you were hiding something. And so to me, the fact that she hasn't been able to be conversant on this over the course of time tells me that she still hasn't resolved in her mind exactly what the heck she was doing. And to me, that's a little bit worse than saying it in the first place.
Yeah, and look, she clearly has not handled it well since then. I'm not going to sit here and say she has. I think it's however she feels, it's pretty easy when a journalist asks you a question, to give them an answer. And campaigns, you make mistakes. She is a first-time candidate, let's be real, for a very serious race. And these things happen. But I also know it's just as clear that this lady is not some racist. She's just not. And it's also clear that the other side, the Democrats, and I don't really even think it's Mike Espy and his campaign, because I don't think they do this. I think it's sort of the Democrat operatives from Washington and outside Mississippi who, and we've talked about this a little bit, who are going to try to push this and make this much bigger than it really is. And ultimately, that's going to come back and backfire. So they just got to be very careful about that.
But from a political science perspective, it is kind of interesting for you all to think about the fact that if you were, if like you're sitting in a classroom or you're diagnosing politics in a kind of a clinical way, you would assume something like this would be an electoral mover. You would assume that when you make a gaffe like this, there's a whole ton of votes that are going to shift over because none of us want to be associated with this. I think it's important as you contemplate where politics are and where our particular electorate is, it's probably not. Probably not in a state like Mississippi. As a matter of fact, Austin and I were talking about it earlier today, and I said, I don't know, what do you guess? Moved her up 2 points?
No, and so I told him I totally disagree. I really do. I do. I think this is a real race. I think this is potentially a single-digit race. She's still the favorite, but it's a real campaign. It's a real election.
Other question, I saw a hand here, yes. So repeating that question, why wouldn't she just go ahead and retract the statement? And is she really representing the party of white flight?
I listen, if I was her and if I was sitting in her shoes and I made that mistake, I would have gotten out the very next day and said, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. But let's talk about education. And let's talk about health care and how we're going to fix infrastructure. And let's talk about the issues that really matter to the voters. But that's me.
Yes, ma'am.
She is a Trump supporter, and Trump says never apologize, and
And was there a question to that, or was it just a?
It's a-
Is that the right thing to do? So, Austin, you're the one that ought to answer that question. Is the Trump policy of never apologize, move on, the right policy?
Look, I think, and I've been fortunate enough to be a part of presidential campaigns and Senate campaigns and governor's races. And I always, if a candidate wants to listen to me, I'm going to say, you got to be who you are. You can't try to be, I mean, first of all, Donald Trump, his popularity, his charisma, what makes him is not transferable. We've seen that. You have to be who you are. You have to believe what you believe and stay focused on that. So I don't think she's trying to not apologize or pivot because of anything that Donald Trump, Phil Bryant, Haley Barbour may have said to her or not said to her. I honestly believe that.
So if I could follow up on that, Austin, is it your advice then to let Trump be Trump?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I was working in the White House, or if I was a member of Congress or in the Senate and had to work with him, and I would never try to change him.
Tweets and all?
You're not going to stop it. You're just not. I mean, and you know, for as many people that don't like him, and certainly I have some times where I shake my hand on some of the things that he says on Twitter. I mean, the country in many ways, particularly on fiscal issues, is in a great position. There are a lot of Republicans that I know who were not for him in the primary. They were for one candidate or the other. But when it came to the general election, they said, I'm going to vote for him because the most important issue for me are Supreme Court justice appointments. He's made two. He's picked two from a Republican side, a conservative side, that appear to be really good. He may have an opportunity to pick, more. So, from a Republican side, if you could just focus on what's getting done, getting rid of regulations, cutting taxes, growing the economy, trying to create jobs for when y'all get out of school, that you have a job that's actually there, and equally as important, picking the right kinds of judges to be on the federal bench and Supreme Court, a lot of A-pluses there.
Let me ask, Austin, because I heard from you tonight, same thing we're hearing from a lot of Republicans. The Democratic Party has drifted so far to the left that it's not going to be electable. They're too far out. At the same time, you just talked about, say, your priority is education, health care, et cetera. I don't hear any of that from the Trump administration. Those are clearly not his priorities. It seems to me that Trump, the Governor Phil Bryant, has moved the Republican Party much farther to the right than we've ever known them. Are you at all troubled that you're going to eventually antagonize the voters in the center who invariably decide our election?
Yeah, and of course, you always have to be concerned about that. And I think most voters in the center are ultimately going to be moved by the economy and fiscal issues that matter to them, pocketbook issues that matter to them, their job, and taxes and things like that. I think that's the most important thing. But I guess that would be my answer to that. I mean, and you go look at the elections this year, and we talked about these urban areas and the suburban areas as well. Republicans did really poor. We lost House races in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I mean, those are conservative. Well, yes, sir. But Oklahoma and Utah, my goodness. Mitt Romney got 70% of the vote there. We have two Republican senators in Oklahoma who, win with 30 or 40 point margins, but we lost because those are suburban, big urban areas that obviously voters there have issues with the president.
I want to say, just as a Democrat, and Austin knows this, that reality makes me so angry. I desperately want a thoroughgoing debate within the Republican Party about President Trump and how we draw any connective tissue between the way he talks and what we used to say we represent. Because I think our party is better I think our country is better whenever both of our major political parties represent their best selves. And so we're in an era, and you said it a moment ago, and I think what we want to do when we talk about the other side is to caricature them. It's a lot easier for me to fight a straw man that represents the wildest possible Republican policies out there. Same for you. It's a lot easier for you to fight a Democrat as the craziest version of a Democrat we can come up with for whoever's voting. But that's really about winning a race. That has nothing to do with governance. And so it bothers me that Jeff Flake turned out to be a paper lion. It bothers me that Mitt Romney, who has some moral authority to speak to these issues, when asked yesterday what he thought about this sleight of hand trick the president is pulling on his AG, said, well, this week I'm at orientation. I'm not answering those types of questions. It bothers me that there's not a Republican lion to stand up, because I will tell you this, in the history of the Democratic Party, we do have lions. Kennedy ran against Jimmy Carter. We've had contested primaries. We've fought over the heart and soul of our party. And it seems to me that what the Republican Party has decided is, for this particular moment, this works electorally, so damn the torpedoes on everything.
Well, no, that's not true. I mean, listen, the guy's the president of the United States. He has an R beside his name. There were many that did not support him in the primary, but he got elected president. He as terms of what he has done as the president on the issues that he said that he would work on, he's executed. His administration has executed on a number of those areas. That doesn't mean that he does everything right. That doesn't mean that I agree, and I'm only talking about myself, with everything that he says. But that also doesn't mean that I have to go say, you know, damn it, I'm going to try to beat him in 2020.
Well, and
that would be ludicrous.
I get that. I guess
no different than if you disagreed with that Barack Obama passed Obamacare in his first administration, and you didn't like that we were about to try to go to universal health care, that you thought you should try to beat him in 2012.
Marco Rubio yesterday started to defend that there was some type of fraud in the Florida elections without any proof at all. One of the bedrocks, one of the institutions of our electoral process that kind of brings us all together.
Marco Rubio is from Miami and knows that the lady who is in charge of counting votes down there has all kinds of issues. Let's please not debate Miami-Dade politics and vote counting down there.
Some questions in the audience.
Yeah, sorry.
I saw you first. Yes, ma'am. Will you repeat the question, Austin?
Sure. Her question, what's your name? Tori? With a T. Got it. I like that name. Tori asked, why does the president continue to push the idea of building a wall, where she said the research that she's done shows that most illegal immigration doesn't come from those that are crossing the border. Is that what you said? Sure. Brandon?
Well, it's a powerful symbol for folks who have decided that the reason that they're not making as much money as they should, or that things haven't gone quite right, in a struggling economy, you look for folks to blame in those circumstances. Whenever you feel like, when the predominant majority of a society starts to feel like they're losing a hold on power, you start to look for who might be the reason for that. And we found a kind of a foil in this society as immigration. And so the idea of building a wall is a powerful symbol for folks who believe that. They think, we'll put a wall up, we'll close it off, and that'll stop it. Now, you and I both know just tactically that doesn't work. But for somebody who's really angry, who's been lathered up on that issue, that seems like a really powerful way to send a message. And I think that a lot of folks that are really happy with this president right now like those powerful symbols. I don't think that we're getting into kind of putting the president on the couch, which is a dangerous thing to do. I don't know what he's thinking. I'll tell you that.
Is that the headline of the day?
He's kind of 50-50 on the stuff that he says and whether or not he stays with it. He's kind of malleable in that sense. So that's a hard one. I don't know, but I think he knows that that speaks to a certain segment of the voting public and that it's an igniting issue. And so I think that's, if you want to know why does he keep mentioning it, people will vote because of the wall. They'll vote because of the caravan.
Yes, I saw you first, and then I'll go back to you. Yes.
The governor's race?
Rephrase the question so everybody can hear it.
Why is Stacey Abrams so cool? No, we're asking what's going on in Georgia, what do we think about it, and what's our take on that? You know, Stacey happens to be from the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which is where I'm from. So we're all proud to have a Mississippian trying to go up there and straighten out Georgia politics. I lived in Georgia whenever y'all Swift voted Max Cleland, so I care a lot about Georgia. It's an interesting race. One of the things from a political science perspective is, if Democrats can't have success in Georgia in this year with Donald Trump in the midterm and with a dynamic candidate like Stacey Abrams out in front of the party, it's probably still a ways off that they win Georgia in a meaningful way. And so right now, as things stand, she still is thousands of votes behind. They're counting those votes up there. And so from that just purely electoral perspective, you have that. But Kemp, her opponent, represents for me the modern face of Republican voter suppression. And this business of telling people when they walk into a voting booth that if your card says Brandon Jones, rather than what we have on the list, Brandon C. Jones, and for that reason, I'm not going to let you vote, that is voter ID taken to an absurd degree. And as Americans, we should all be deeply offended by that kind of effort to disrupt people from voting.
Yeah, I would just say Georgia's clearly been turning into more of a purple state, going from red, not all the way to blue, much like Virginia, even though Virginia's kind of now turned into a blue state. I think Georgia will be seriously up in 2020. Trump will probably win it, but the Democrats will pour money into it. And I don't know the example that he's talking about Brandon C. Jones versus Brandon Jones, but I would agree. I do agree. I do believe in voter ID, but I mean, if it's clear this is who I am, let me vote. But I have not heard that example.
Yeah, they have a law in Georgia that Secretary Kemp, who's the Secretary of State there now, who is Stacey Abrams' opponent, enlisted, which basically calls for perfect correction with whatever piece of identity that you use. It must match the name that's in the voting roll.
That's not how Mississippi's voter ID law is. I mean, we all know when you go vote, just got to vote. Here's my picture and here's my name. Okay, there you go. Let's vote.
Yes, back there. Yes, sir. We'll rephrase it.
What's your name? Wow. It's some Austins and some Tories. There we go.
Tories.
What Tori asked was, how concerned are we that we're moving more towards sort of pop culture type candidates versus, business leaders, governors, senators, and so forth. Look, I've always been concerned about that. I've always kind of felt like it's a popularity contest. It was clearly a popularity contest with Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. I spent a year in Boston, Massachusetts, working on Mitt Romney's campaign, and it was clearly I felt that way. I felt like Mitt Romney had way more experience than Barack Obama, but man, Barack Obama was a rock star. He was clearly popular. Obviously, he was a U.S. senator, which is different than President Trump, and it was different, and he's different than if The Rock decides to run. He may run. Wow, oh, goodness.
Tori, I'm gonna play right into Austin's far left trap that he said earlier in the night. One of the first candidates I volunteered for was a guy named Bill Bradley, who came to be known as a New York Nick, and then ultimately ran a primary against Al Gore. I'm not concerned, and Ronald Reagan, who is just on the Mount Rushmore of political figures for the Republican Party, of course, started his introduction into American life by acting with a monkey. So I I don't
But of
have.
course, but for many, Reagan was sort of, he and Goldwater, the father of conservatism.
Yeah, yeah. He'd be mad at that kid that grew up and went off to school now. But look, I think that I'm not concerned about folks coming from all aspects of life. I don't think that there's anything disqualifying about being a good singer or being innovative in another way. I think we have to be open to that. But I just hope that wherever the popularity contest takes us next time, it's somewhere apart from where we are at this particular moment.
I trust American voters, though, ultimately, to be able to weed through the process, weed through the candidates, decide, this guy's never done anything in government or business, but you know what? He's got a lot of good ideas that I'm going to be for him, or this guy's just doing this to go sell more, albums. So I trust American voters more than anything.
I don't know what I trust after 2016. I'm still in like a PTSD scenario up here. There's a guy who's a lot smarter than me who said that Democrats are in a state of disrepair because they hold cultural sway, but they don't hold sway in the halls of power. Republicans are frustrated because they hold no cultural sway, but they hold power. There's some truth to that. I mean, there's a little bit of angst there. But I think we've had some great leadership. I mean, look, if you're a true Mississippian and if you study Mississippi, Willie Morris is the guy who said, we can't read, but we can sure as hell write. Mississippi has contributed at just a disproportionate share to the cultural, literature and music of the world. And so I think we all in Mississippi, as Mississippians, have to hold a candle for folks who come from that background.
There was a hand in the back. Yes, ma'am. You'll have the last question from the audience. Rephrasing the question, why do the radicals on either side seem to emerge rather than the centrists?
Let me go first real quick.
Sure.
I think that radicals are always, they're just louder, There is this silent majority who are out busy going to work and raising their kids and coaching their kids in sports and getting, trying to better their lives, where the radicals are just radical on both sides, on the right and the left. And there's no doubt that social media has given them a microphone on both sides, given them this vehicle and this forum to present their ideas to the world. And so more of them have decided to come out of the closet and say, hey, here I am. I'm for this crazy idea on the left or the right. And what are we going to do about it? All we can do is continue to try to say, I'm ready to have a conversation with you. This is what I think that we try to do a good job with. I'll have a conversation with you, and let's see if we can't figure out some things that we can go work on to try to make our town, our county, our state, our country better.
It's a great question. I think it sums up kind of the debate that's going on in places like this and in every place that they're paying attention to it. It's a hard question for us to answer because one of the things you'll notice is once you pick a side, so to speak, which Austin and I always kind of try to say the first jersey we wear as Americans, as Mississippians, let's not get that convoluted in our partisanship. But the truth is that when you are partisan, you're the last one to notice when you drift radical. And so I might be considered a radical to some folks in here because of positions that I've taken. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to notice that. But the key is, no matter what you believe in your heart, no matter how you might vote, no matter what your policy vision might be, is that you always make an effort to speak back over across that divide, and that you try to build a government and a reality that a person who doesn't feel anything like you do could live their life and have opportunities within. And so that's the real challenge of government. It really, I'm not too concerned when somebody comes in and says they're ultra-conservative. I mean, I'm an adult in Mississippi. If that bothered me, I would just have to crawl in a hole or leave. And so that doesn't bother me. What I want to know is does that person feel that it's important to them that I be eradicated? Or that, my gay or lesbian brother or sister be eradicated? Or that a black person be hung up or something? I need to know where you are on that. If you're more conservative than I am, well, whatever. So long as you don't try to control me with it.
I think what's really important is that particularly the folks in here that are in college, they're students, get involved. Get involved in campaigns, get involved in politics, get involved in government, both here on campus, but certainly in the next, we got tons of races next year. Every legislator is up for election next year, and we're going to have competitive governor's races, lieutenant governor's race, all down the ticket. These campaigns, they are dying for young, smart, energetic people like you guys. Get involved in a race. You'll have a ton of fun. You'll meet a lot of people. But we need more young people, whether you're a Democrat, an independent, a Green Party, Republican, whatever it is, just get involved. That's my advice for you.
Last question of our two political experts, starting with Brandon. Will Donald Trump be reelected in 2020?
Man, I'd love to just throw out a good, quick answer to that. But I think that, again, the problem for Democrats is to kid themselves into believing this is going to be an easy out. Austin and I were together doing an event for the Clarion Ledger, doing their coverage on election night. And Austin can attest, I think both of us were just not believing what happened based on what we thought would happen. And so it would be a mistake to bank on it. And since this is the last word, I want to say one thing about the Overby Center. I don't know if there's anything better than in this particular moment of history to have a bulwark for journalism, investigative, kind of looking at politics and believing in a free press is probably one of the most important and most patriotic things you can do at this particular moment. And so we're sitting in what I consider to be kind of like a high holy temple to the way that the world and our country needs to carry on itself. So if you work here, if you study here, whatever the case may be, it's a real great thing to be invited, and we're appreciative of that.
Right. Thank you.
And I wish this place was here when I was in school, but sadly it was not. Look, I think the answer to your question is that he will be reelected. And I just think I look at 2012, and listen, Donald Trump got less votes than Mitt Romney did nationally. But the Democrats had a bad candidate. And whether you like Hillary Clinton or not, I'm not trying to be mean-spirited towards her. She was not a good candidate. She just wasn't. She didn't inspire. We talked about Beto O'Rourke earlier. I disagree probably 95% with what Beto O'Rourke believes in. But I know that dude can inspire people. Hillary Clinton could not. And that was the problem in 2012. And I don't know that there is that candidate. He certainly has not emerged yet in 2020 that can be inspiring enough, not so far to the left, that can go get these independent swing voters back in Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Florida, that are going to decide the election. And I don't see that person right now. So I have to say I think Trump will win.
Well, Austin and Brandon, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you all.
It's been great. Thank you.